Well, hello there. Happy 4th of July. Well, anyway, it's the 4th of July when I'm filming. Maybe you can hear the pop pops, but I don't know what day it's going to be when this actually uploads, but my neighbors are letting off some fireworks. So, hey, it's a festive time of day. Um all right, so I was thinking about maybe talking about how the United States is a representative republic and it's a liberal nation, and how liberalism is actually basically everything that the right wingers believe today. It's meritocracy. It's equal opportunity under the law. It's not equal outcomes. It's equal opportunity under the law. It's the ability to pursue the lifestyle that you want, the way you want to do it, without the government telling you what you shouldn't do or what you're allowed to do. Um, Yada yada yada. Really, the for the most part, the right wing of politics is the side that's kind of largely in line with what the word liberal actually means, which is it's so interesting that we've sort of flipped that. Anyway, we'll put that to the side. It doesn't matter for the sake of this conversation because I don't think that's really what I want to talk about today. What I'd rather talk about today is um, this concept I have called in information saturation, something like that. Basically, the premise of information saturation is that what you're basically like a sponge. You're like a sponge, and at some degree of saturation, you can't actually contain any more information. And we can actually see, like in generations, um, and the style of media that they prefer to consume, like they have different levels of saturation. So, um, you have like social medias, TikTok, Facebook, all of these kinds of apps. Those would be like the maximal degree of saturation to the point where you don't really have any space for anything at all. Not far behind that is the television era. So that's some of the millennials, all of Gen X, and all of the boomers. They're sort of like the television media era. Um, and I actually don't think that the gap between social media saturation and television saturation is sort intrinsically that large. I think that it is just due to how the networks operate, but it doesn't have to be that way. It just kind of is that way. There is sort of a gap. Um, and then you go back to the radio era, which is like the Great Depression era, um, the greatest generation as well. And then you go back to, hmm, what? Books, newspapers. Now we're talking about the printing press. And that's a significantly lower level of information saturation. This kind of instant access that um, radio, television, and the internet have. The newspapers, they were attempting to approximate that, but they never reached that level. And I think that the world is a fundamentally different place. I think that if you successfully, and this would be very hard to do, but if you successfully removed yourself somehow from from the immediate information from the immediate information loop, you figured out how to stand outside of it for a while, I think that it would change the way your mind works. I think that it would change how receptive you are to information in general. I think you'd be able to learn faster. Well, my neighbors are really letting off with these fireworks. Holy cow. I think you would literally be able to learn faster. I think that you would be able to care more about what you're hearing about. And this is sort of my theory behind the information saturation loop. And imagine how it was before the printing press. Holy cow, we're talking about a different planet. I mean, everything would have had to be handwritten, either by a scribe or by yourself, um, mailed, a decree nailed to a public space, um, or it would be word of mouth. Someone would have to physically tell the people, hear ye, in the public square. And so I think it's an important exercise to try to imagine what life would have been like before your current level of information saturation. It's very, very hard to imagine, but try to take yourself back. As a millennial, I was in the space before the internet took over the world. I remember we had dial up in my house, and when somebody would call the house, it would disconnect the internet. The phone line was where the internet came through. So, yeah, and that happened frequently. Can you imagine how mad you'd be if you got a spam call and your internet went out? Oh my gosh. But back then it was understood that that was going to happen sometimes. I was in elementary school when they put in those goofy looking Apple, they look like lifesavers. They're like these kind of clear green, yellow, blue, red machines, and they're massive screens. We'd play Oregon Trail, and that was like the first time any generation had ever done that before. It was such an interesting time. So anyway, what are you gonna do? I think you should. I think you should try to get out of the context of this generation that you're living inside of right now, and try to imagine what life would have been like in a previous generation if you can. Specifically along the lines that I'm describing of how information traveled, how much time you would have had to wait, and the quality of information that would have been necessary in order for that information to actually travel. It would have required a higher bar for something to actually authentically travel any great distance. You're not gonna spread ideas and information of very, very low quality. It's just too difficult and too expensive in those days, especially if we're talking about before the printing press, where you would have had to hand write all this information down. That's not going to happen. So, um, and imagine that you would be like a sponge that didn't have all of this water in you. And the water is like the overload of information that's got you all the way filled up to the top so that there's no more space for anything else. And I think that this is one of the reasons why, people speculate a lot about Gen Z. I really like Gen Z. I think Gen Z has potential to be one of the most resilient, emotionally and mentally resilient generations that's ever existed. And they have sort of an inoculation. Basically, they have like a vaccine against propaganda. And paradoxically, it is the fact that they grew up so heavily immersed in information and disinformation and misinformation. It's just bullshit, right? Just bullshit. And they've heard people on social media trying to sell products, and they've seen gurus trying to tell you how to live your life and all this crap. And they're just like, I don't care. I'm going to do what I want to do. I'm going to live my life on my terms. I'm going to be me. I don't give a shit about your product, your self help book, your solution to life. I don't give a shit. I'm going to do me, and that's it. And Gen Z has this kind of go fuck yourself attitude. And it's a fascinating generation. They're also very, very sarcastic and cynical. So they're very cynical. They're very sarcastic. They're overly saturated. They don't really believe anything they see on the internet. They don't believe anything they see on the television. They don't believe anything that central authority figures say. They just don't really believe much. And my theory is that it's actually a result of information saturation, that they've just seen too much. They've heard too much. They are kind of aware that you can't actually really fact check any of these claims, um, and that most people are really just kind of talking out of their ass. They were also raised in a bubble of postmodern rhetorical theory, which kind of postulates that we live in a post fact era. And, postmodern, post fact, post empiricism, these are all kind of synonyms. Like the empirical scientific method is sort of the modern bubble. Rational empiricism, that's modernity. That's the modern philosophical lens. Postmodern would be we're no longer living in a fact based empirical scientific space. So the postmodern worldview would be that, you know, we're all biased, we all have um, perspectives, and that life is a power struggle between competing biases. And basically everything is a war. And this has contributed, excuse me, to the cynicism of Gen Z. Even the ones that didn't swallow the postmodern pill still got touched by the concept a little bit. And so somewhere between the saturation of information, the bombardment of information that never ends, the 24-hour news cycles, the 24-hour propaganda cycles, the media characters and the personalities trying to sell them things, and just all of the boom, 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 24/7 information download, and the postmodern, somewhere between those things, I believe they've been inoculated against belief in a way, which is such a strange thing, that an entire generation is basically just going to wing it. But it's kind of cool. I'm not mad at it. Gen Z has a lot of potential because of this. They can really forge their path. If they're careful, they can make some good changes, I think. We'll see what they do. I think they have a lot of potential. I kind of believe in Gen Z. I think they're going to do it. I think they're going to do well. Um, Specifically, the young men in Gen Z. And some people might get annoyed by that, but I don't care because I've grown up hearing about how women are going to change the world, and women this and women that, and women are the best, and women, women, women. So I don't care if it bothers someone that I say young men in Gen Z are going to change the world. I really believe that. I think that um, I just think that they're going to do what they want to do, and they're not going to let anyone tell them what to think. Um, and I think that they're tired of being demonized, and I think they're going to go and make their life the way they want to make it, and they're not going to let someone bully them, and they're not going to let people boss them around, and they're just going to unapologetically live their lives. This is really what I see for Gen Z, the young men in Gen Z, and I think that's going to work. I think people are really going to resonate that with that when they see it. Hearing about it, I don't think people are going to like to hear about it. I think people are going to like when they see it. Um, it doesn't sound sexy. It doesn't sound warm. It doesn't sound that nice, but I think the reality of what it means is that we are finally going to have men who go out and build a life and live the way that they need to live to be competent and to be respected. And they're going to take their position in the world for themselves. And that's what men should do. That's what men have really always done in history. They didn't do it in my generation. They didn't really do it in Gen X either. I think men did that in the boomers generation. So we've kind of had two generations where men have sort of lived kind of sheepishly and apologetically and kind of meekly. And I think Gen Z is going to be the generation that doesn't do that. I think Gen Z men are going to do exactly what they want to do, and they don't care what anyone thinks about them. And I'm optimistic about that. I think we're finally going to have. I think there's going to be men who don't, of course, but I just think that for the first time in about, let's say, 40 years, maybe 40 years, let's say, we're going to have a generation where some percentage of the male population just goes out and does exactly what they want to do. And that's what we need as a nation. We need that. Every nation needs that. All nations need men who go and build and thrive and are confident and live for um, their own benefit. It's so important to have an esteemed group of men in your country. Um, and so information saturation and postmodernism have produced a kind of emotionally hardened group of young men, and they they don't give a shit about anything that anyone thinks about them. They do not care. Um, and That's kind of a throwback thing, if you go back 80 years, men were like that. Men were tough. Men were hardened around the edges. Um, there's also like an interesting thing with Gen Z. Not that this video is intended to be about Gen Z, but I guess that's what it's becoming. Gen Z has a little tinge of vanity. I'm not sure if it's because they grew up with like IG and TikTok, but they're kind of a vain, uh, image obsessed generation. So they're also going to the gym and like they kind of care a lot about diet. So they're also kind of healthier than my generation was. So um, I see a lot of potential in Gen Z. I really do. I think that they have a lot. I think that they have a lot that they could contribute to the world. So I wish them the best. I'm cheering them on. I want Gen Z to do really well in this life. I'm bullish on Gen Z. um, yeah, so I think that millennials are pretty heavily information saturated as well, especially at this point now that they've lived through the second and third levels of social media revolution, and the information wave and just like YouTube and all that. So prescriptively, um, I think if you can try to tap out for a little while of the information loop, I think it will um, bring you back down to earth in a way that will be healthy for you, and um, give you some mental space for a little bit of clarity and allow you to become emotional again. The problem with information saturation is that it kind of jades you and makes you very cynical and bitter. And it's pretty unhealthy for your emotional state and for the quality of your relationships. You don't have a lot of energy left for the people that are actually right around you. So if you can, I would encourage you to turn off the news. At least turn off the news, especially news about places that you have no ties to whatsoever. Reserve some of that for more local communities and people that you actually interface with on a day-to-day basis, so that you can actually give a shit about the people who are around you, immediately around you, instead of just kind of blowing past them and being stressed out about people you don't even know. Not that you should not care about them at all, but just that you shouldn't obsess on a 24-hour cycle about something that you can't really do anything about. It's not good for you. It's not good for your mind. It's not good for your spirit or your heart, etc. Yes. I could tie in the Gen Z piece into how America, because I'm on the day of July 4th, I could tie in how Gen Z can take advantage of the fact that America is a liberal republic in concept. So one of my concerns for Gen Z, one of the red flags that I think Gen Z needs to watch out for. I guess we're embracing the Gen Z angle at this point. Is that there's been a lot of rhetorical energy spent on the concept of identity as such. This is one of the consequences of postmodern thought. The postmodern ethos sort of focuses a lot on the relationship between identity and interest groups. And if you have shared attributes that are a part of your being, then you naturally intrinsically belong to an interest group. And those interest groups that are fundamentally different are engaged against their will in a conflict that they have no control over, and they will be a participant in it, whether they intend to or not. And this kind of identity focused groupthink, um, from the perspective of unconscious bias, is a horrible thing for a liberal republic. In fact, it's not compatible with a liberal republic. It's a totally revolutionary, um, hostile idea that is in conflict with liberalism and a republic at that, because um, the way that it's in conflict with liberalism is that it doesn't matter what you think, it doesn't matter what you do. So it's not a meritocracy, which is what liberalism is. Liberalism is a meritocracy. At some fundamental level, there's no difference between liberalism and meritocracy. Um, but postmodernism is also in conflict with republics. And why is it in conflict with republics? Well, because how can you represent, let's say, a state, for example, or even a country at that, if the groups inside of it are engaged against their will in a conflict, which is predicated on their biases? It's impossible. You can't govern a state where all of the people are at war with each other. You can't do that. And you actually also cannot elect somebody who shares all of the interests and character traits of everybody who is in that space. That's also impossible. And so when you talk to people who are um, infected by the postmodern worldview, what happens is they they cannot see things from the Republican perspective. And by Republican, I mean American. I mean the perspective of the United States. There's no difference. I'm not speaking about the Republican Party. I'm speaking about the structure of Republican leadership, where you have a representative. That's what it means. Some people say representative democracy. Um, Republican representative democracy, that's the same thing. So, postmodernism is an anti American ethos. And that's why all of the people who are postmodern are anti-American. That's not a coincidence. They don't like meritocracy. They don't like the structure of the nation as we have it, and they want to change it. And so I think that Gen Z has a good chance in resisting that. I see no reason why. I see no reason why Gen Z shouldn't be able to resist that. I know that a significant margin of Gen Z has swallowed the postmodern ethos hook, line, and sinker. But I also know that a significant portion of them have not, and they're resisting it actively. So it'll be interesting to see what they do in the final analysis and what their children do, and how they prepare their children, or what kind of world do they want their children to live in? Do they want their children to live in a world where if they have a dream, they can go accomplish it, regardless of who they are, regardless of what circumstances they were born in? Because that's what the American experiment was made to do. Or do they want the kind of country where everyone is born against their will into a conflict that they cannot even choose to opt out of and they have to fight? That's the postmodern ethos. So I don't want to live in a world like that. I want to live in a world where my fellow citizens here in this country are my brothers and sisters, and they can live their lives as they choose, and I can live my life as I choose, and we don't have to fight. We don't have to fight. We can live differently, and that's okay. And they can spend their money on the things that they want to spend, and I can spend mine on the things I want to spend my money on, and we'll mostly leave each other alone. That's the kind of world I want to live in. And they can be whatever religion they want, and they can look however they want to look and dress however they want to dress. And I'll give you a funny anecdote. So when I was in kindergarten, um, I was telling my mom a story about one of the students who was there, and she's trying to figure out who it was. Like, she didn't know who this girl was. And so she goes, "Do you mean the black girl?" And I was like, "No." She's like, "Oh, I thought it was her." Well, I went back to school the next day, and it turns out that it was the black girl. I didn't even notice. This is spoiler alert. This is a story where I'm letting you know that I literally didn't see color. People say, "Oh, I don't see color." No, I literally didn't even notice she was black. And people will be like, "Oh, not seeing color is racism." Shut up. That's stupid. It's not racist to not notice that someone has a different skin color than you. That's stupid. If you think that, that's stupid. Um, it is kind of racist to make the entire uh, central focus of your worldview race. That's kind of racist. Um, One of the things I love about America is that my stepmother is Chinese. Um, and yet it's true. My parents are white. Hey, spoiler, you notice? Um, for the past like 16 years, I've dated black women exclusively. Before that, I lived in Costa Rica. I come back, and now I speak Spanish on a regular basis with people who live in my state. We are basically the melting pot of the world. We have a lot of blended cultures here, and there have only been a few places on Earth that have ever done what we've done as successfully as we've done it. You know, you can look at Rome. Um, Rome. I don't know, man. There's not very many places that have been this ethnically diverse ever. Culturally and ethnically diverse. Spain was quite diverse, but they didn't really like it. They didn't really stay that way. The UK, England is obviously quite diverse at this point. They've done very well. I don't know, English common law, the Magna Carta, the American Constitution. These documents have done a really good job at creating nations which allow basically anyone to come in and live their life of choice and do what they want. The only thing that's kind of complicated about it is that any philosophy or system of government or structure requires a certain level of unity in the preservation of that ethos in order for it to continue. So, um, the only thing I will say is that in order for the American experiment to continue, we do need everyone who's coming here to co sign the American Constitution and agree to adhere to its tenets. That is necessary. You know, you can't come to the United States and live in the United States and hate the Constitution. That's not going to work. So the Constitution is such an awesome document. It's so cool that it actually took us like 200 years to even live up to the contents of it. So, and we've improved and iterated on it. It wasn't perfect in the beginning. Um, so I guess one thing I could talk about that's kind of interesting is that, hey, it's July 4th, you know, we might as well air it all out. I don't believe in natural rights. I don't think that natural rights exist. I don't think that they're an object out there in nature like a rock or water, right? Like I've never seen a natural right in the ground. Um, this is actually something that the Quakers talked about. The early Quakers basically said, "I've never seen a natural right." I can't remember exactly how the quote goes, but I agree with it. And to use to use a postmodern sort of rhetorical language, natural rights don't exist. Rights are basically a social construct. I'm not going to say a social contract, even though they do sort of function that way. But that's basically what Rousseau would have said. But I'm gonna actually call them a social construct. Um, they exist in the sense that we understand them and we believe in them. They don't exist in the sense that as soon as we arbitrarily decide that they don't work anymore, they stop working. And so they're sort of a tenuous and delicate thing. Tyranny can arise at any moment and wipe out your rights, and there would be absolutely nothing that you'd be able to do about it unless you were prepared to defend those rights. If you believed in them enough to actually do that. And as much as the founding fathers asserted natural rights as the source material for why they were justified in making this country and rebelling against the king. Um, I have a feeling if you spoke to them in private, they might actually admit that they don't really believe that they exist out there in nature. The founding fathers were very, very clever people. But I do think that they understood they needed a justification. And if you need a justification to start a revolution to build a country out of natural rights, I guess is as good of a reason as any other to do so. But rather than natural rights existing, what I do think exists is capacity to defend. So, for example, people will say, no, like if you're out in a forest and someone attacks you, you have a right to defend yourself. And I'm like, no, I have the ability to defend myself. I can do that. In the forest, there is no right. If a wolf attacks me, I don't get to say, you don't have a right to do that. I have a right to defend myself. No, the wolf attacks me and I shoot it. It's that simple, right? Like I'm just going to defend myself against a wild animal. Wolves and sheep don't have a structure of governmental rights which regulate their interactions with one another. That's not a thing. So rights really don't exist outside of governments, and they're kind of fabricated delineations which allow people a space within which to act. So um, there's a fellow online who calls this force doctrine. This is an idea that I also came up with about 5 or 10 years, probably 10 years ago. And it was so refreshing to hear somebody else kind of talk about this. I think force doctrine is a fine way to put it, but um, basically, it's this idea that at some level, this all kind of boils down to what can you do physically? What are you capable of doing? Um, that's your ability. And then what do we want to agree that people should be allowed to do? Those are rights. And somebody with the capability to enforce them is going to have to do that. That's why we have a legal system. So yeah, I don't really think that rights exist. I don't really agree with the founding fathers on that one. Uh, but I'm glad that we've decided to have them, and I enjoy them. And rights come with responsibilities. That is a You really don't have any right without the responsibility to upkeep them. Just like you won't have a garden if you don't tend it, and you won't have a clean house if you don't clean it. Your rights, because they don't exist as a natural state, have to be upkept and tended to in order to be preserved. So if you have any rights that you enjoy, they need to be tended to, or else you will lose them, because they aren't actually like an object in nature. They're sort of a state that we have culminated in our society, and it actually took, well, at least 500, but we could say one, two, or maybe even 3,000 years to come up with the ideas that we have right now. I think that this project goes at least all the way back to the Greeks. Um, and for that reason, I do celebrate Independence Day, July 4th, because it's the birthday of this nation, which, in my opinion, is the zenith and culmination of thousands of years of efforts gradually moving towards a better state and a better place for us to live. I think we've finally gotten there at a pretty decent level. But it's a tenuous situation. We could lose it. So, um, with that, let's show some gratitude for what we have, and humility in being the inheritors of this great experiment, and understanding that it will take work. It will take work to not only preserve it, but if we so desire to improve it, it will take work. So happy July 4th to you and to your family, and to everyone that you know and love. And thank you so much for watching. And I will see you on the next one. Hopefully, this has been some interesting ideas or content or food for thought. But at any rate, I'll see you on the next one. This is Dan versus everything. Happy July 4th. Have a good night. Bye bye.